Hello students. So we are in the final lecture for this semester for the fluid mechanics course. So the final lecture is going to be on rapidly varied flows. In particular, we are going to talk about hydraulic jumps, which is basically a kind of rapidly varied flow. Okay, so let's quickly get into the lecture. So a hydraulic jump is essentially used to dissipate energy. Okay, so hydraulic jumps are known to occur whenever there is a supercritical stream meets a subcritical stream, right? So now all of you know what a supercritical stream is. A supercritical stream is one in which the depth of flow is less than the critical depth for that flow rate, right? And a subcritical stream is one in which the depth of flow is greater than the critical depth for the given flow rate, right? So whenever I have a supercritical stream at a certain flow rate meeting a subcritical stream at the same flow rate, right? At that point, so naturally, when you have two streams of varying depths meeting, this meeting cannot, and of course, not only are the depths different, the velocities will also be different, right? Assuming that the channel cross section is the same, if the depths are different, then naturally the velocities will also be different. So the supercritical stream will have a very high velocity because it is very low depth and the flow rate is the same. So the velocity has got to be high. On the other hand, the subcritical stream is relatively more, lower velocities and higher depth. So when these two streams meet, what happens is that there is a lot of disturbance in the water surface, right? So you have two uh, differing kinds of streams meeting. So at this meeting junction, you have a lot of disturbance in the water surface and what are called eddies. You might have heard this word eddies and turbulence. That kind of turbulence is created, and this ends up dissipating energy in the hydraulic jump. So the hydraulic jump essentially is when the supercritical stream of a lower depth meets a subcritical stream of a higher depth. So because there is a transition from a lower depth to a higher depth, so it is like that is why the name hydraulic jump has come about. Okay, and of course this, if you remember, is in contrast to the earlier lecture that we had about gradually varied flow, where the the slope of that water surface is very gradual. Here, as you can imagine, that water surface is very steep, and you can see a transition, a very quick transition from, over a very short distance, you will see a transition from uh, a small depth to a higher depth, or a jump from a lower depth to a higher depth. Okay. So now the interesting thing is that this hydraulic jump has many practical applications, right? So most important application of that is that it is used to prevent erosion downstream of a dam, right? So now you can imagine when I release water from a dam, that water has got great kinetic energy because the dam stores all of that water with a lot of potential energy. When the gate of the dam, or when the spillway, when the water comes out over the spillway of a dam, it comes with a very high velocity, right? So now if this water is allowed to continue flowing at that high velocity, it will end up creating a lot of erosion downstream of the dam, right? So, and then that can be very unpleasant for the security of the dam, for the safety of the dam, the structural safety of the dam. Okay, and so in order to prevent erosion, you come up with this idea of a hydraulic jump, where over a short distance the stream transitions from, or jumps from, a very fast moving supercritical stream into a gentle moving or a slower moving higher depth subcritical stream. Okay, so that is one of the practical applications of hydraulic jumps. Okay, then another illustration is that if you have a sewage treatment plant where you are treating sewage before releasing it into some nearby river or into the ocean or so on, what is typically done is you have to mix some chemicals in order to aerate the sewage. So for that, a hydraulic jump is very useful because it mixes up with this turbulence and with the eddies that I spoke about earlier. It mixes up all the chemicals, and then it's very efficient as a aeration for the sewage. Okay, so you'll learn more about this in future semesters when you learn about the course environmental engineering. So you'll come to that later on. Okay, so that is the practical significance of the hydraulic jump. Okay, so now let us quickly take a look at a figure representing the hydraulic jump. Okay, so here I have, so assume that there is flow happening from left to right. On the left, you see cross section 1, where I have a flow depth of y1 and a corresponding velocity of v1. And if you see, the velocity head component v1 square by 2g is much larger than the pressure head component, which is only y1. Okay. On the other side, on section 2, I see a flow depth much larger than y1, y2, and a corresponding velocity of v2, and the corresponding velocity head v2 square by 2g is much smaller in magnitude in comparison to the velocity head at cross section 1, right? So that is cross section 1 and 2. In between these two cross sections 1 and 2, I see this this what is called the hydraulic jump with a very steep slope, right? The flow is transitioning from this supercritical depth to this larger subcritical depth, and in doing that transition, it is doing this it is doing it through a hydraulic jump, which is of course resulting in a lot of turbulence and a lot of eddies and a lot of energy losses. Okay, so here this dotted line over here is depicting the energy loss as we move from cross section 1 towards cross section 2. And so this energy loss E, sometimes it's also represented as E suffix L, right? So EL is the energy loss encountered in this hydraulic jump. Now, in the case of gradually varied flow, if you remember when we solved the problem in the previous class, we noticed that the distance taken to transition from one depth to the other was some 8 or 9 kilometers, right? So that distance is a very much larger in comparison to a hydraulic jump, where this hydraulic jump may typically happen in tens of meters, maybe 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, in that range of distances you may have this transition from one depth to another. So that is again another reason why we justify calling it a rapidly varied flow. All right, so now what we're going to do is we're going to quickly get into some theory behind the hydraulic jumps. So to begin with, what we are going to do is we'll consider a hydraulic jump that is happening on a horizontal rectangular channel. Okay, so I'm going to show you a figure. So this figure is a schematic diagram of a hydraulic jump on a horizontal rectangular channel. This figure has been taken from Munson et al.'s book, A Brief Introduction to Fluid Mechanics. So the figure that you see over here is very similar to the earlier one that you saw. I have y1, which is the supercritical depth on the upstream side, and on the downstream side I have y2, which is the subcritical depth. Okay, so in between I have the hydraulic jump happening. Okay, so this dotted line that you see over here represents the control volume that I'm going to consider for this analysis. Okay, so now what we are going to do is we are going to make some assumptions about the flow, right? So although the flow is complex and turbulent, and if you remember, when the flow is turbulent, it is very difficult to analyze it, from a first principles perspective. You can't use an analytical approach completely in understanding a turbulent flow situation, because turbulence is random, and as of now there is no analytical approach towards understanding randomness. We can only have experimental approaches or numerical approaches, right? So this turbulence, although it is complex and turbulent, we are going to make a couple of assumptions. Number one, we're going to assume that at cross sections 1 and 2, the flow is uniform and steady and one-dimensional, right? So as you can see, in between cross sections 1 and 2, the flow is definitely not one-dimensional. It is going in all directions, right? Because it's random. We can't assume that it is flow is happening predominantly in one direction. There are, so as you can see, in this arrow is pointing in the more or less in the positive x direction, whereas this arrow points shows that there is a backflow, right? The flow goes and then turns around. So there's a lot of mixing happening over there. Okay, so it's a very turbulent, random process in the middle of the hydraulic jump. Okay, but at the beginning of the hydraulic jump, which is also called the toe of the jump, and the tail of the jump, so this is the end of the jump, at these two cross sections, we are going to assume that everything is uniform and steady and one-dimensional. Okay, so that is one assumption that we're going to make. The next assumption we're going to make is that we will ignore the shear stresses with the channel bottom. Okay, we are going to ignore those shear stresses for the moment. Okay, and we'll proceed from there. What we are going to do next is we are going to write the momentum equation for this control volume, conservation of momentum, right? So what do? I have to look at all the forces acting on this control volume, and since it's a horizontal channel, the weight is acting downwards. It is not acting in the x direction. The x direction is from positive x direction is from left to right, right? So in the x direction, I have only two forces: F1, which is the hydrostatic force acting at this cross section 1, and F2, which is the hydrostatic force acting at cross section 2, right? So I can write the conservation momentum very simply as F1, which is positive, minus F2, which is in the negative direction, equal to rho times Q times V2 minus V1. Now, how did we obtain this? We obtained this from Reynolds transport theorem. If you go back and look at your notes, you will find out that this will actually be rho A2 V2 square minus rho A1 V1 square, right? But since A1 V1 equal to A2 V2, we can simplify it as rho Q, which is A1 V1 and A2 V2. The flow rate is steady, and then you multiply it by V2 minus V1. Okay. Then this you can again further simplify as you can write Q in terms of V1 and Y1, right? Q, the velocity, sorry, the flow rate is equal to V1, the velocity at cross section 1, multiplied by the cross sectional area at cross section 1, which is Y1, the depth, multiplied by B, which is uh, the channel width, okay, which is perpendicular to the screen, as you can see. Okay, so that is the momentum equation. Now let's try to further simplify this. Let us look at terms F1 and F2. Okay, how can we estimate what F1 is? We can estimate that F1 is half rho g y1 square times capital B, and F2 is half rho g y2 square times capital B. Now, how did we arrive at this formulation? We've assumed that the pressure distribution is hydrostatic, right? So if the pressure distribution at cross sections 1 and 2 is hydrostatic, then F1 and F2 will be these terms: half rho g y1 square B and half rho g y2 square B, right? So if we put these terms into this equation over the momentum equation, I simplify after getting rid of all the common terms. Rho goes out, B goes out, and so on. I'm left with y1 square by 2 minus y2 square by 2 equal to V1 y1 by g into V2 minus V1. Okay. So this is simply after substituting these values for F1 and F2 into this equation and then getting rid of all the common terms, I end up with this expression. So I'll use this and proceed forward. Okay. So this is my equation: y1 square by 2 minus y2 square by 2 equal to V1 y1 by g into V2 minus V1. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to write V2 in terms of V1, right? It's very easy to write V2 in terms of V1. What is that? Y1 square by 2 minus y2 square by 2, left hand side, it's not changed, equal to V1 y1 by g, no change. V2 here I'm writing it as V1 y1 by y2, right? Since A1 V1 equal to A2 V2, if you write V2 in terms of V1, it will look something like this: V1 into y1 divided by y2 minus V1. So in this term, I see V1 in both these terms have the common term V1, common factor V1. So I can remove V1 out of this parenthesis and I get V1 square into y1 by g into, I also bring out y2 in the denominator. So I'm left with y1 minus y2 times V1 square y1 by g y2, right? So now you can see the left hand side and right hand side have some common term. The left hand side I have y1 square minus y2 square, and on the right hand side I have y1 minus y2. So clearly you can get rid of y1 minus y2 on both sides. You will be left with a very simple expression: y1 plus y2 equal to 2 v1 square y1 by g y2, right? So this is simply some algebra that I've done, and I've rearranged the terms, and I'm getting this much simpler looking expression: y1 plus y2 equal to 2 v1 square y1 by g y2. Now the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to divide both sides of the equation by y1. I'm going to divide both sides of the equation by y1. So what do I get when I do that? 1 plus y2 by y1 equal to 2 v1 square by g y1 into y1 by y2. So this y1 by y2, I have retained it over here. and I've divided this term by y1. Okay, so I'm getting 1 plus y2 by y1 equal to 2v1 square g y1 into y1 by y2. Now, if you notice carefully, what is v1 square by g y1? This term over here, v1 square by g y1 for a rectangular channel, is that not the Froude number square, right? V square by v by under root gy is Froude number. So v square by gy is Froude number square, right? So then when I simplify this equation and cross multiply, I get y2 by y1 whole square plus y2 by y1 minus 2 Froude number 1 square equal to 0, right? So I've simplified this expression to a great extent, and I've got now a quadratic equation in y2 by y1, right? Y2 by the ratio y2 by y1, I have a quadratic equation in that variable y2 by y1. This I can very easily solve. So I can solve this very easily. You know the quadratic formula. So y2 by y1 equal to half minus 1 plus under root 1 plus 8 fr1 square, Froude number 1 square. Okay. Now I have only taken the positive root, right? If you remember from your high school algebra, there should be a plus or minus over here. But if I have a minus, I get a negative number for y2 by y1, which is physically meaningless. So I discard that negative root and I'm only keeping the positive root. So I have obtained an expression for the ratio of the subcritical depth to the supercritical depth, y2 and y1. Okay, so y2 by y1 equal to half minus 1 plus under root 1 plus 8 fr1 square. All right. So now this y2 and y1 are called sequent depths. Okay, y2 and y1 are called sequent depths. Now this is very similar to what we already earlier saw in the case of uniform flow, where we for the same specific energy we had two depths, one corresponding to supercritical and one corresponding to subcritical flow, right? So those two depths, if you remember, these are called alternate depths, right? So for the same specific energy in a given channel for a given flow rate, I can have two possible depths, which are called the alternate depths. Similarly here, in the case of rapidly varied flow, the subcritical and supercritical depths are called the sequent depths. All right. So this is the ratio of y2 and y1 in a hydraulic jump. Now the next thing we are going to do is we are going to try to understand what is the energy loss that happens in a hydraulic jump. Okay. So if I write the specific energy equation between points 1 and 2, it will be y1 plus v1 square by 2g equal to, oh, I'm sorry, this should be y2 plus v2 square by 2g plus EL. EL is the energy loss encountered in going from points 1 to 2. Okay, so this should be y2 plus v2 square by 2g. I apologize for that. So it's y1 plus v1 square by 2g, left hand side, equal to y2 plus v2 square by 2g plus the energy loss. The figure says HL, but I prefer to use EL for energy loss in an open channel, in a rapidly varying flow. Okay. So then if we've already got an expression for the ratio between y2 and y1. Similarly, we know the relationship between v1 and v2. If you rearrange terms and simplify it a little bit, you will get an expression for energy loss, which will look something like this: EL equal to y2 minus y1 whole cubed divided by 4 y1 y2. Okay, so this is the energy loss that happens in while transitioning from this supercritical depth to the subcritical depth through a hydraulic jump. All right. So sometimes this energy loss is also represented as a relative energy loss as EL by E1. EL by E1 is given as this rather cumbersome expression that you see over here: minus 3 plus under root 1 plus 8 Froude number 1 square cube divided by whatever, something similar on the denominator as well. Okay. So this again, you can derive this very easily. It shouldn't be very difficult. You know, because you've already obtained an expression for energy loss EL, you can divide it by E1 and write it in terms of Y1 and Y2 and convert it into Froude number 1. You will get an expression that looks like this. All right. Now these expressions, you can also write it in terms of Froude number 2 square. Okay. Both, just like here, we derived this expression y2 by y1 equal to so and so 1 plus 8 fr1 square. You can also write it in terms of fr2 square, which is the Froude number of the downstream end, right, at the subcritical depth. Okay, you can also do that. You can derive that also. It's not very difficult. So here, instead of writing it in terms of, for example, here, if you divide it by y2, right? And if here, instead of writing v2 in terms of v1, if you write v1 in terms of v2, you will get Froude number 2 square. Okay. So it's only a question of, we chose to do it like this. So we got Froude number 1 square. But if you redo the algebra a little bit, writing v2 in terms of, writing v1 in terms of v2, then you'll get v2 square out common. Then you can write v2 square by g y2 would be Froude number 2 square, and so on, right? So I'll leave that to you. So you can work that out. It shouldn't be very difficult for you all. Okay. Similarly, even in the energy loss, you can write it in terms of Froude number 2 square also. Okay. We've just done this as a matter of procedure, but you can also write it in terms of Froude number 2 square. All right. Now the interesting thing is, if you put in the Froude number of the incoming supercritical stream, you can estimate how much energy will be lost. So if in this equation, if I put in Froude number 1 equal to 5, I get an energy loss of about 50% of E1, right? So half the energy of the incoming stream is lost by the time the hydraulic jump happens and it becomes a subcritical stream. Okay. In fact, if I increase Froude number 1 from 5 to maybe 10 or 20, my energy loss will be even more. So the greater the incoming velocity, the more will be the energy loss due to this hydraulic jump. Okay. So what we'll do now is quickly solve a problem. It's a very simple problem. I'm going to just give the problem statement, and I expect that you'll all solve this and attend the next lecture, right? In the class, if you have questions, then we'll go over and try to solve this problem in class. But otherwise, I'm expecting that this is such a simple problem, you should be able to solve it. It's a fairly straightforward problem. Let me just read out the problem. In a hydraulic jump occurring in a rectangular channel of 3 meters width, the discharge is 7.8 cubic meters per second, and the depth before the jump is 0.28 meters. Estimate the sequent depth and the energy loss in the jump, right? So you're given the channel width, the discharge Q, and the depth before the jump, which is Y1, okay, the supercritical depth. So if I know the flow rate, I know the width, I know the depth Y1, I can very easily find out Froude number 1, right? Because I know Q, I know Y1, I can very easily find out Froude number 1. And then once I know Froude number 1, I can find out the ratio of Y2 by Y1, right? We've just derived an equation, Y2 by Y1 equal to half minus 1 plus whatever, 1 plus 8 FR1 square under root, etc. So all you need to do is find out Froude number 1 and put it into that expression. That will give you the relationship between Y2 and Y1. And since Y1 is known, you can find out Y2. And then, of course, energy loss, we have just now derived an expression for energy loss. So that should also be fairly straightforward to do. So I hope you can all solve this before you come for class next time. All right. So we'll be okay. Now here's some more little bit of theory about how hydraulic jumps are classified. So hydraulic jumps are essentially classified on the basis of the incoming Froude number. The Froude number of the incoming supercritical stream. If it is between 1 and 1.7, then that kind of jump is called an undular jump. 1.7 and 2.5 is called a weak jump. 2.5 to 4.5. Okay, so all of these numbers are given to you. You can look this up in any textbook. These are all, this is not to say that these numbers are hard, very, rigid boundaries. It's not like if it is 4.49, it's oscillating, and if it's 4.51, it's steady, and so on, right? So these are only indicative ranges, and this is all based on experience, practical experience in observing hydraulic jumps in real life situations. Okay, so this kind of this kind of empirical classification is commonly done, in these kinds of fields where there's a lot of practical utility. All right, so that is a very, very brief introduction to hydraulic jumps. This semester, this is all we will be doing. So we will meet this week on Friday, and we'll wrap up the course. So I hope things have been relatively smooth this semester. After the lockdown, you've had an opportunity to listen to these lectures online. Now the good thing is these are going to be on YouTube until until you need them. And I'm not going to remove these videos from YouTube, so you're free to watch them as many times as you want. And of course, you can email me or call me or send me a message on WhatsApp, and get in touch with me if you have any questions, and we'll take it from there. So we'll meet on Friday, and let's wrap up this semester on a good note. All right. Thank you very much. So meet you on Friday.